Before we can create culturally responsive music curriculum, develop culturally responsive and diverse concert programs, we need to address the leader of the instruction. Culturally responsive music instruction doesn't happen without the leader of that instruction, the music educator, being able to exude cultural competence and proficiency, understand how their biases do show up in instruction, and the ability to look through an equity lens when they're developing music program policies, practices, and procedures. The first step towards making culturally responsive music education the norm and not the exception in your instructional practice is actually to develop a mindset for equity in music education. Hello, and welcome so much to my live stream tonight. Tonight is the first session. Ooh, let me get a little water. Hey, I see people coming on in. Welcome, welcome. Tonight is our first of a four-part series where I'm going to be diving deep into my framework for culturally responsive music education, which is how I help the teachers that I work with, the schools, districts, and organizations that I support make culturally responsive music teaching a sustainable part of their practice. So over the next 4 Wednesdays, I'm going to be going live across all my platforms over on Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn, as well as Instagram, to talk about each of the main parts of the framework and how it helps music educators make culturally responsive music teaching a part of their practice, not an extra thing that they add. I guess this is your first time joining me for a live or just coming across me. Let me introduce myself before we get too far. My name is Ashley Cuthbertson. I use the pronouns she and her, and I'm a former K-12 music educator and adjunct professor, and now the very proud CEO and principal consultant of A. Cuthbertson Consulting, where we're on a mission to shift the landscape of music education, placing culturally responsive and equitable instructional practices at the center and not an extra or an add-on. And I do that by helping K-12 music educators connect with their learners, create affirming learning environments, and design engaging, high-quality music instruction that meets the diverse and ever-evolving needs of today's learners. Primarily, our services look like professional learning because I am still an educator, and I define professional learning both as our professional development workshop series, which we have several of those, as well as instructional coaching group, and when I work one-on-one with teachers, as well as our curriculum development services, and as well as our general consulting and advisory services and things like that. So in addition to my work as an educational consultant, working all over the country with partners, schools, districts, organizations, and music teachers, I'm also a speaker, conference and keynote speaker. In fact, I'm speaking at a conference tomorrow and Friday and next Wednesday. So like I said, I have 3 conferences coming up in just the next 7 days. I'm always so excited to be able to share this learning with music educators all over the world. And 2 of the conferences are actually international conferences. So I'm excited to be able to speak to an international conference. It means a lot to me that people trust me to speak to their folks, their audiences during their events. So if you're also looking for a keynote speaker or a breakout speaker, definitely send me a DM or head over to my website, ashleycuthbertson.com, and check out my speaking services. And then, also, I'm a soon-to-be author of my very, very first book, which is going to be launching very soon. I'm super, super excited. It's been I guess you could say a labor of love for sure. Definitely a labor of almost 2 years of working hard on and off, but definitely very seriously hard these last few months, that I'm excited to be able to start releasing some more information about the book soon. So definitely keep your eyes on my pages. If you're not already a member of our email list, make sure you jump on so that you can be the first to know when all of that is going down. But tonight we're talking about making culturally responsive music teaching the norm and digging deep into the first part of my framework that I use when I work with my school district organization partners, as well as the teachers that I work with. Hey, Angelica. And like I shared before, the framework is what I use to guide the work that we do. You can think of it like the standards of my consulting company, just like we have standards that guide our math instruction, our social studies instruction, our music and arts instruction. In my business, we use my framework for culturally responsive music education, which I initially developed about 3 years ago, but the current iteration that I use now about 2.5 years ago. That's what really guides all of the work that we do, whether I'm coaching a teacher one-on-one. Hey, Angelica. Angelica, good evening. Whether I'm leading a professional development workshop, whether I'm speaking like this or speaking at a conference, it is the guiding anchors of everything that we do and guides our work. So I'm really excited to get into each of the main anchor standards of our framework over the next few weeks. So make sure that you are joining me. I'll be here live across all the platforms every Wednesday for the next, well, today and then the next 3 Wednesdays at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. But let's get into today. So first today, let me sure I'm going to stay on my notes so I stay on track because I could talk about this forever. So today we're talking about developing a mindset for equity in music education. And what's really interesting is often when I have teachers that join my programs, because I have teachers that I work with virtually that work in my different coaching programs, as well as our brand new course, which is 12 modules of basically all of this that I'm going to talk about. As well as my school district organization partners. It's really interesting that often when people first come upon my social media page, or maybe I speak at a conference that they're attending, or maybe somebody, shares one of my articles or one of my podcast episodes, often people hear what I do and they think, oh, this is a great way to learn how to improve my instruction, or here's a great way to learn curriculum tips to make my curriculum more culturally responsive. And here's a great way I'm going to learn about what kind of diverse repertoire, what culturally responsive repertoire I should be utilizing in my classroom. And sometimes it's surprising to people to know that that's actually the last thing that I support folks on, because what I've learned is that, I can give strategies. I can write curriculum for you. I can guide you, give you strategies on how to create curriculum. In fact, that's really where my biggest expertise is in the curriculum writing and instructional delivery piece. Because really what I do is I distill all of the things as far as equity and culturally responsive practices into the instruction, right? So that's all very easy. I can give you repertoire choices, but the real work is in making the mindset shifts and the thinking shifts so that when you are actually enacting the instruction, you're creating the lesson plan, you're putting together the concert program, you actually know how to approach those things utilizing the principles. You're not relying upon somebody else to tell you what to do. You're also not relying upon external factors to decide what to choose and what not to choose. Because it's quite easy to give curriculum advice, quite easy to give repertoire suggestions. What takes more effort, because it's the most difficult part of the work, is really examining yourself. And so as I was starting this work several years ago, what I figured out was that I can't actually start at the curriculum part. I can't start at the instructional strategy part. I have to really start with the shifts necessary so that people are thinking in a different way. Otherwise, when I leave you after the time I'm working with you, you're going to go back to exactly what you were doing before. And remember, I said before, our goal is to shift the landscape of music education. You don't get a shift if your mindset has not changed. So the first step towards making culturally responsive music teaching a norm really requires folks to get into the hard self-work so that they are prepared as the leader of instruction in their music program to be able to create the conditions necessary for learning and then create the learning itself. So about this time 2 years ago, well, not quite 2 years ago, I think it was August, or maybe it was September. It was one of the very first professional developments that I led when I went full-time in my consulting firm 2 years ago. So it was like a back to school professional development that I was doing for a school district. And I remember that it was the very first time I'd done many PDs before that. When I was a classroom teacher, I was on the side doing all these trainings and coachings and all these things and speaking. But I remember it was the very first time I did a heavy equity professional development where I went right on into talking about in music education, how bias appears in our policies, practices, and procedures, how inclusion is all very, very heavy. And I remember very distinctly in that session having people it was back to school PD. So teachers are thinking about getting back into their classrooms, but folks were literally having side conversations and clickety clacking on their keyboard, working on stuff and having their arms clearly not engaging what I was doing. And later when I was reflecting on, well, why did that, that did not go the way I was hoping for it to go. What was that? What I realized was I missed a step that beginning the more serious kind of, step-by-step work, I had really missed a really important step, meaning that people don't really care about what it is that you're bringing to them. And so you have made it matter for them. I kind of think of, you got to give people what they want before you can give them what they need. And so just like with teaching kids, right, you have to hook them into the lesson before you can get into the teaching, because if they haven't been engaged, it doesn't really matter what you're doing. And so I realized that, I was going deep into all this, heavy equity stuff, unconscious bias and cultural proficiency continuum, and working with a school district that had a commitment to investing in their teachers' professional development and their journey and capacity building around equity. I kind of assumed that they were already bought in, that they were already opting in, right? But that was clearly what was not happening, right? And so what I realized was, and this was a tweak that I made in the framework pretty early on, is that I can't just jump into the stuff, even when I'm in a situation where I'm working with folks that I know have had cultural proficiency training maybe before. They've had maybe some sort of culturally responsive instructional training before. You have to still, just like with kids, you have to make it relevant to the people first. The other thing that I'd noticed was happening was, when we talk about issues of equity, it becomes very emotionally charged, right? So people have these walls that can go up, and they're not ready, they can't receive any of the information, the knowledge, and there's definitely no skill building, and so no sustainability, right? And so when I was reflecting on that particular PD experience as a facilitator, realizing that two things were missing. One, I hadn't made it matter to them, and two, I hadn't addressed the emotional aspect of it. The first part of really addressing the development of an equity lens comes through helping teachers to understand the symptoms of the equity problem that they are experiencing in their classrooms each and every day, but then also separating that from the bigger root equity issues that are ingrained into our music education, our US education system. What I realized when I started switching that training to really focus that, to lower the emotional load first so that people are engaging, but also giving them clear examples of things that are happening in their classroom, because I know what's happening in their classroom. I was a K-12 music teacher for 12 years. I know what's going on in their classrooms, and I work with teachers all over the country. I understand what's going on out there, right? When I changed my approach to really start here first, I saw so much better results. People were much more ready to come along with me on their journey, even if they weren't exactly sure what was going to happen. One, because the emotional load of it was gone. When you start with the facts of the symptoms, right? I say the facts are the facts, right? There's no emotional part of it. It just is what it is. That lowers the emotional load, and the walls kind of come down. And then when you address the symptoms and separate it from like the roots, right? It helps teachers to not feel so, I guess, guilty about it, right? To see that it's an ingrained part of our system. Recently, I did a pretty big edit on the first part of my book, actually, which is actually talking about this. And what I changed in this professional development is that we talk about first the history of music education in the United States, which was never meant to be for all of us. In fact, it was created in 18, I won't get into the whole history lesson, but music education in this country started in Boston in the 1830s with Lowell Mason, if you're familiar with that. And it was created for wealthy white men and boys, which I am not any of those. Many of the folks that I work with are not, right? So when we start there and we understand historically how the system was not really created for us and how it has created these systemic issues, it allows teachers to be able to understand, it allows teachers to understand, separate from their own maybe emotional response that they're having, but they can see like where it came from. And so the first point here I want to make about how we develop this mindset for equity in music education is that we have to help our music teachers, whether you're a music teacher yourself or if you're an instructional leader that supports music educators, we first have to start with understanding the systemic symptoms, but then being able to separate it from the root issues, right? We can't just give people cough medicine all the time and not address the reason why they have a cough. We have to look at both the symptoms. Hi, Fahari. And we also have, thank you for coming. We also have to look at the symptoms as well as like systemically, what is the root problem that's really happening here? So for instance, and I was looking at all these numbers earlier, and of course I can't remember any of them. So off the top of my head, a study was done, I think it was 2010, that found that music educators, they surveyed general music teachers, choir, band, and string teachers. So of the teachers that were surveyed, about, I think it was 80%, but it was a large majority of the teachers are modifying instruction, providing adaptations for students with disabilities, but only 9% felt comfortable doing so. Yikes, right? Only 9% of teachers feel comfortable. A study, I think it was the 2019 Elphys and Brill study, found that even in 2019 already we had surpassed over 50%, I think it's 54% now, of students in the country are Black, Brown, Indigenous, or Asian. But even in 2019, it was like starting to creep over half. But our white students are way overrepresented in our music ensembles in the United States, right? These are symptoms of a bigger issue, right? And yes, Farhari, we can keep looking at the symptoms and putting band-aids on them and giving people cough medicine, but there's a bigger issue, and the numbers, the statistics I just shared with you are just the symptoms, right? And so when I'm working with music teachers, I find that when they understand some of the symptoms separate from the root issues, it helps them to start to see through a different lens, not a lens of, you're guilty, we're blaming you, but here's where we are, right? The fact is the fact. How can we move forward? And so something that you can do, it's always important to me when I'm coming on and talking to folks, that you leave with something that you can actually take action on. Right? We don't shift the landscape of music education just talking. We got to take action. So something that you can do in an exercise I take teachers through when I'm working through this particular workshop with them is to look specifically at music program policies, practices, and procedures, and what can we do about them to know whether there are opportunities to increase equity in them. So something you can do is just literally take out a piece of paper, make a list of policies, practices, procedures you use in your program. And don't worry so much about like, is that an equity issue or not? Just make a list, right? So I don't know, what are some common ones? A common policy in music education is if beginning band students need to play clarinet before saxophone. That could be a policy that you have. You have procedures for how kids come into your quiet room, right? You have procedures for how kids maybe get their choir instruments out or choir folders out. I was thinking about band and choir at the same time. That's a procedure that you have. Maybe a practice that you have is that you audition students for different ensembles. Like just make a list of all the different things that help to kind of manage and govern your program. And then think about these things. Just pick one of them. Maybe looking at that policy about students have to play clarinet before they can play saxophone. Who benefits from that policy? Who doesn't benefit from that? What maybe are the opportunities to increase equity? And then what actions would need to be taken in place to be able to do that, right? That's a very simple exercise that you can do to start kind of reprogramming your brain, right? Changing your thinking, changing your mindset to start seeing through this lens for equity when you're looking at the way you lead your music program, through the policies, the practices, as well as the instructional procedures as well. So that's something that you can easily do. And let me know if that's something that you do. Also, let me know what questions you have. I'm live off the cuff, got a couple notes here. So let me know what questions you have. I'd love for this to be a conversation. So let me know in the comments. I can see you on YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram too. Let me know what your thoughts are on that, as well as let me know what questions you have or what else you would add to that conversation. I love for your voice to be in the live room too. So that's like the first thing I found when I was really solidifying my framework a few years ago, was that I can't just jump right in, right? We first have to make sure that teachers are building that lens and they're starting to shift to see where are the symptoms, but also what's the underlying root equity problem in our programs, policies, and in the procedures. So that's the first thing. The next thing is we're looking at how do we develop this mindset for equity in music education, is we have to be engaging in the critical self-reflection piece. And so a lot of times when people are thinking about like critical self-reflection, I feel like there's a lot of very like surface level conversation, surface level exercises maybe that you've even done in a cultural proficiency training that doesn't really get to the heart of what the purpose of engaging in critical self-reflection is. The purpose of critical self-reflection is to really unearth your values, your beliefs, your identity, and how all of those things result in the biases that you hold. We all have bias, right? You, me, everybody. That's just your brain's shortcut of all it's got 11 million bits of information that it's receiving. It's trying to make sense of all that. You really only are conscious of 40 bits, right? So the prior knowledge and experiences and the interests and just the knowledge that you already have, your brain makes assumptions to shortcut based on those things. And that's why we have a bias, right? And so critical self-reflection is supposed to unearth all of these things, but I find a lot of times it's very surfacey, right? It just gets to like, maybe you look at different parts of your identity and maybe what might be some common biases, But the really important part here as teachers leading instruction in our music programs is we need to understand how they're how they're not infecting, how they're affecting our instruction. And I remember before I really did a lot of the self work that I've engaged in now and continue to do now. I remember as a teacher sometimes being frustrated with students when I give them an activity or something to work on during music class and they finish it just like that. And for me, I'm like, why? You must not have taken your time doing it. You must not have done quality work. You must have rushed through it. But the reality is some of those students, they just caught on quickly or they just finished their work quickly. I was so focused on the hard work piece of it and not the whether or not they learn piece of it. And that's just a result of a value that I have been instilled, right? That working hard is what leads to success in life. But the reality of that belief and that value that I hold was bleeding over, as all biases do, into my instruction. And because I wasn't aware intentionally of that, I was not always able to see it, right? So critical self-reflection should really exist to help you as the instructional leader in your classroom, right? And if you are an instructional leader for a school, a district, or an organization, this is the work you should be supporting your, oh, hey, Bryson, I hope the summit went well today. I'm excited to present tomorrow. But as an instructional leader in your school, your district, or your organization, you should also be supporting your music educators to be doing this kind of deep-seated unearthing, right? Because the surface level, let's just talk about our identities, is nice and helpful, but that's just the tip of the iceberg. It all, for me, goes down to what's the impact on our students and what is the instruction that's impacting them. So if we're not looking at how our values, our beliefs, identities, and thus our biases are impacting our instruction, which they are. Oh, good, Bryson, I'm so glad it was a good day. Awesome. But if you're not really looking at those things and how they are impacting the instruction, because they are, right? The choices you make as far as what you teach and also the choices you make as far as what you don't teach is influenced by your values, your beliefs, your biases. But if you're not helping your teachers to unearth that, and if you're not unearthing that for yourself, you're staying very much at the surface level, which is not what allows real change to happen. Like I said, my mission is we got to shift the landscape of what we do in music education. And we don't do that just talking about surface level ideas. We've got to unearth the deep-seated things and understand how it's impacting our learners through our instruction. Yes, Bryson, so many folks do like a one-off session, a one-off cultural proficiency training, and you can't get deep in a one-off, right? And so a lot of the work gets started, but then it never actually goes anywhere. And I know a lot of recently I've been having a lot of conversations about the next school year with folks, and so I'm looking at a lot of strategic plans and how can my work support their priorities within the strategic plan for their music and arts educators. I should say I specialize in music because that's what I do, but I also support music and arts teachers with school districts. So it just makes sense to work with fine arts all together. But then it's like, okay, well, we're going to really look at these priorities that are stated in your strategic plan. How can my consulting firm support you? But we can't shift thinking in a one-off, right? It has to be there has to be ongoing continued support. In fact, that's actually what the law says professional development is that it's ongoing and sustained and job embedded. And the thinking that resulted in how we teach, didn't happen over 1 year or 2 years. It happened over many years, right? And so it's going to take that amount of time to also unearth, unlearn, and then make new practices be sustainable. So I always tell the folks that I work with, right, like this can't be a one and done. Like you really need to be ready for a partner that's going to support you and hold your teachers through this process if we're really looking for the change that we're saying that we are. And what I know is that the people who are most attracted to the work that I do are ready for that change and want more than just a one and done. Someone came and talked to you for 30 minutes, which I do that also, but came and talked to you for 30 minutes, like change doesn't happen like that, right? So as we're really thinking about this piece about understanding bias, understanding identity, the key learning here that I want you to take away with is that you have to do the deep work of understanding, well, where do my values and beliefs come from? And this is actually, I can even share this exercise. So something I do with my teachers is I want you to think about all the things, oh, hey, Dr. Jackie, all the things that are important to you as far as they can be related to various things that you do or just things that you know. So for me, it's important that people that I work with feel included. They feel a sense of belonging. It's important to me that people are treated fairly. It's important to me that people get the support that they need. This is something that you can do. Like, get a piece of paper out, just make a list. What are things that are important to you? And then, just kind of similar to the other activity I shared, take one of them and just consider, like, where did it come from? We're not born with values and beliefs already hardwired into us. They're all taught through the cultural influences that we have as we're growing up, right? So take one of them and really think, where did it come from? Like, why is it important to me that people that I work with or people that I'm friends with, it's important to me that people feel that they belong? Like, where did that come from? And something that you can do is literally just ask yourself that question multiple times. Why does that feeling of belonging feel important to me? Well, I want to feel like I belong in the spaces where I am. It's important that I feel that way. Why is it important that I feel that I belong? Well, there's been times in my life where I've been in spaces where I didn't feel so welcome. And it was hard for me to really engage in those spaces as much as I wanted to, because I just didn't feel like the other people were making an effort to make me feel like I belonged, right? Going down that rabbit hole to really get to, like, what is your deep-seated belief and value and where did it come from? That's the work I don't see a lot of people willing to do, but I know if you're here, that's something that you're interested in, because that's what I talk about and that's what I do. So those of you that are just hopping on, thank you so much for joining me. Tonight is the first session of a 4-part series that I'm doing called Making Culturally Responsive Music Teaching the Norm and Not the Exception, where I'm breaking down my framework for culturally responsive music education, which is basically the standards in my consulting business as far as how I work with teachers and how I support schools, districts, and organizations. It's the anchor standards in my business to make sure that what we're doing is aligned with the greater mission and vision that I have, which is shifting the landscape of music education and really making sure that music actually is for everyone. We say that, right? But we know, of course, that that's actually not the reality. That's actually not true. So tonight in our first session, we're getting into developing a mindset for equity in music education. And so the first thing I shared about was when I work with folks, I learned through like a not great PD facilitation experience that I was facilitating, that you can't just jump into talking about bias and talking about identity and talking about cultural proficiency and the problems of equity in music education. You got to first start with helping people separate the symptoms from the root systemic problems, so that that emotional wall that sometimes comes up when we're talking about equity issues, we can lower the emotional and kind of cognitive load that, like, your brain gets hijacked because you're in this emotional high alert, right? So we talk about those things to separate them, because facts are the facts, right? And I shared some statistics around the symptoms that I know teachers experience in their music programs every day, but then also, like, what's the root inequity of that? And then I was just talking about, we also need to make sure that our instructional leaders in our classroom, our music educators, as well as the folks that support them, right? Our supervisors, our principals, and other folks, that we're making sure that our teachers are engaging in the critical self-reflection work around understanding values, beliefs, and biases, because those things are driving the instructional decisions that they're making in their music programs, which impact their students. We need to understand what those things are. And then the last thing I wanted to touch on before I take some questions, and let me know. I love for this to be a conversation. So drop in the comments any questions or just anything that you want to add to the conversation. I'd love for your voice to be involved as well. But the last thing I wanted to touch on is the cultural proficiency piece. And so ultimately, when we are preparing ourselves, music teachers or folks that support music teachers, when we're preparing to be able to create the learning containers that can contain this kind of teaching and learning, which is different than what many of us experienced, and the kind of instruction that allows kids to really get to high quality, but also rigorous goals, we want to make sure that our teachers are developing cultural competence and cultural proficiency. And so the work that I really do around this with music teachers is, first of all, understanding what is cultural proficiency. There's such a negative bias, I guess, around that word culture. Like, people hear the word culture and immediately they're like, but cultural proficiency is just the ability to work effectively with people who are different from you, right? That's a very, very, very simplified definition of what that is. There's obviously more to it, but that's the essence of what cultural proficiency is. And in understanding cultural proficiency and being able to exude that in your program, it allows you as a teacher to be able to make the adaptations necessary so that students of all kinds of diverse backgrounds, and I'm not just talking about diverse racially and ethnically, right? Diverse in the whole sense of the word, have the ability to feel that sense of belonging, but also have the ability to know that they can trust you to handle issues of diversity that might come up in the classroom, right? That you can handle when maybe somebody makes that off-color comment or says something that is hurtful, right? Developing cultural proficiency allows you both to understand some key principles of what cultural proficiency is, but as well as what like the key barriers are. Typically, the barriers to cultural proficiency are just the unawareness of a need to make adaptations, resistance to change, not being willing to let go of the privilege that you have, right? The fear of I'm going to lose something when really you don't lose anything. You just gain by allowing more people to be part of the table. So being able to understand both the principles of cultural proficiency, which there's several, I think there's 5, as well as the barriers, but then between those two things are tensions, right? So when we look at principles that we want to exude, but then like these very real barriers that come up, how do we navigate through the tension? The really important thing here, and maybe you've done this kind of thing that I walk music teachers through, is you can't really effectively respond to a bias situation or an anti-bias situation or a situation where someone's maybe exuding like a culturally destructive behavior. It's really hard to know how to react to those things right in the moment. And often, I know me, myself, I've had times where like something happened or somebody said something or I saw something. And in a moment, I was like, ooh, I don't like this. Something doesn't feel right, but I didn't have the language to respond. And this reminds me of many years ago in my school district, there's a big all county choral festival for all the 6th graders. It's fun for the teachers to support the kids. It's a whole year long thing. We prepare them and then we get to all come together. It's like almost 1,000 kids. Pre-COVID, I think after COVID, it was not that many, but pre-COVID, it was almost 1,000 6th graders from all over the school district coming together to make this beautiful music. And I remember one year, there was a piece of music on the program that I was like, I don't know about that, but I didn't quite have the language to like know how to speak up about it. So I just didn't do anything. I sometimes think about that because that's not the kind of action taker that I am now. But then I just didn't really know what to say or what to do. And so in the moment, I didn't say or do anything. And I think a lot of times, many of us who know that diversity is important, that know that creating equity is critical, especially in our education spaces, we know that these things are important, but then we don't prepare ourselves for how we're going to actually respond when something comes up. And so as we are preparing the leader in the music program, the music educator, we've got to make sure that they're prepared for how are they going to respond to that situation that I just shared. When there's a piece of music, maybe that a colleague, maybe I'm a choir teacher and my band colleague is programming something on their concert that is a questionable piece, or maybe not questionable, maybe it's just straight up not appropriate. Do I know how to respond to that in a way that respects the relationship between me and my colleague, but also exudes the principles of cultural proficiency, right? And so a lot of times I feel like we miss that when we're working with educators in general, and definitely music educators. We don't get prepared for how do we deal with different scenarios? How do we know how to deal with a behavior that's culturally destructive versus someone who's maybe like a cultural pre-competent situation where they're super curious and just excited to do everything, but then in their over exuberance, some things kind of go the wrong way, right? How do you, dealing with those things is different. How do you address those different situations? And we want music teachers to feel confident when those situations come up, not only when they come up, but that they can confidently handle whatever comes to them, right? So it's always my aim that music teachers that I work with leave feeling really confident that they can handle anything that comes their way. Not maybe that they have all the answers, but they still know how to respond to it in a way that when they walk away, they know that they left that person still feeling like we can still have a relationship if they have a relationship with them. Maybe it's a colleague, maybe it's a friend, maybe it's a student, right? We got to talk about that too. Sometimes students say stuff that we got to address, right? But the teachers feel confident in the way that they are responding and that they know how to respond to situations, even if maybe the response is not necessarily an answer, maybe it's a curious question, or maybe it's a reflection back, right? So the really important piece here is we're supporting music educators with creating that mindset around equity in music education specifically is how are we preparing music educators for all the different kind of scenarios that might happen in their program with their own students, with parents, with colleagues, with the community, with the greater, music ed community. How are we preparing them to know how to respond to things? I was at a leadership assembly, I guess about a month ago, for a national organization, and one of the leaders in the organization, who is one of the leaders around professional development and publications, made a really, really great point that I was like, that is so important, and that's it. They said that I'm on the equity. Well, I'll just tell you, I'm on the National Association for Music Education's Equity Committee, and so I don't know why I'm being like coy about it. Like, people know that I do that. So in June, the NAFME had their National Leadership Assembly that they have each year, and part of the assembly is all these different meetings. I feel like meetings is not the right word, because meeting sounds boring, and it was not boring. It was really, they did a really great job. It wasn't just meetings, so I shouldn't say that. It was like great facilitation of conversation, I think, is a better way to put that. I mean, there were some meetings too, as well as our Hill Day, advocating on Capitol Hill, going to meetings with senators and members of the House and things like that. But anyway, so another one of, I think it was the last day, after a session that a person put on, I was talking to, he leads the efforts of NAFME around publications. And he was saying, because I mentioned, I'm newly appointed to the National Association for Music Education's Equity Committee. And he said, one thing that, would be really great is that everything that we do as an organization is being filtered through the Equity Committee, just to give it that like last look over before it goes out into the world, which is kind of creating a bit of, he didn't use the word bottleneck, but I heard, there's a bottleneck in the system. What if instead of everything having to go through the Equity Committee, and it's a big organization with lots of different things going on, what if instead of everything having to be funneled through the Equity Committee, what if we help all the different people who hold roles to have this lens to be able to make these kind of decisions on their own without having to always rely on the Equity Committee? And he didn't say it like that, but that's basically the gist of what our conversation was, and was such a great, great point. Because that's ultimately what we want, right? If we're going to make culturally responsive and equitable teaching and instructional approaches a mainstay, a cornerstone, just what we do, that we can't rely on other people to tell us how to make an equity decision. We as music educators need to have the confidence, the skills, the knowledge, also the dispositions, right? The thinking, the mindset, to be able to make those decisions on our own. Otherwise, we're never really going to get anywhere. There's still going to be a small group of people that we're always going to. But if we're really going to make big change and big impact on our students and our music programs, every music educator needs this kind of knowledge, skill development, and dispositional change, which is the work that I do, right? So thank you, Angelica. Yeah, and reflecting back is helpful, especially if you're not really sure, like, the answer. Just reflect back what you heard the person say. Sometimes just the instance of, I heard you say this, can trigger in someone's brain, like, oh, maybe now that I hear you say it out loud, maybe that wasn't the right way to put that. So that's what I have for you tonight. Let me know what other questions or what other thoughts you want to add to this conversation. Again, this is just the first of a 4-part series I'm doing in July called Making Culturally Responsive Music Teaching the Norm, Not the Exception, where I'm going to be diving deep into my framework for culturally responsive music education. That's what I use to guide the work that I do in my professional development programs, in my coaching programs with music teachers, in the curriculum development that I do, as well as other consulting and things like that. And so the 3 things that are the tonight's topic: developing a mindset for music education, equity in music education. The 3 main things I want you to walk away with that we talked about was, first, about how do we help music educators separate the symptoms of the equity problem from the root issues, right? Starting to develop an ability to see where the problems are through an equity lens. really making sure that we're engaging in like true critical self-reflection that really gets to the unearthing of our values, our beliefs, how our identity plays into that, and how our biases result from that, so that music teachers understand how their biases are showing up in their teaching choices so that they can interrupt the negative biases that are happening, right? And then finally, we talked about cultural proficiency, the ability to work effectively with people who are different from you, but also the ability to see the principles of cultural proficiency, what the barriers are, and be able to navigate the inevitable tension that's going to happen, especially if you think about, the traditional ways that we do things in music education are out of alignment with the principles of cultural proficiency. So how do you navigate that, right? And how do we prepare our music teachers to actually know how to respond, right? Because many of us might see something happen or hear something and then we feel a way, but then we don't know how to respond. And there has to be action. And the only way for music teachers, for anybody, to be prepared to actually take action and respond in the moment. So if you've practiced it, you know what to say, you know strategies like Angelica, thank you for that, reflecting it back, asking curious questions, pointing out the issue directly, making sure that we know how to respond, right? Because if we don't ever take any action, there's never going to be any sort of change. So that's what I have for you tonight. I'm excited for the next 3 times I'm going to be coming live, same time, same place, next 3 Wednesdays, 7 p.m. Eastern, across all of my different platforms. And if you're interested in learning more about the framework and what does this look like, I'll share a little bit. So recently I launched the self-paced version of I call it the Mac Daddy course. It's called the Foundations of Culturally Responsive Music Education, as a part of our responsive music educator curriculum. And it is both a version of the work that I do when I do my workshop series. We have 4 workshop series right now when I work with schools, districts, and organizations. It's both a combination of that plus, because of course, when I do a workshop series, I'm kind of bound to the amount of time that I have. But in the Mac Daddy Foundations course, I really was looking at how can I make this the most comprehensive course to prepare music educators to make this kind of teaching sustainable, to make it not feel so overwhelming. Sometimes trying to sort through all of the social media posts and blog posts and books and going to webinars and going to conference sessions, it can feel very overwhelming, right? So I created it to literally be the step-by-step. It follows my framework that we're going to talk about over these next few lives. It follows the framework, but it goes even deeper, right? Some of the activities I even shared during our live tonight. And so I'll share a couple of those over the next few weeks. But if you're interested in learning more about that, you can actually go to my website. It's a self-paced course, and it's open for enrollment all the time. So you do not need to wait for me to make a big announcement. I'll, of course, keep talking about it lots because I'm super, super excited for music teachers, schools, districts, and organizations to have access to this. One barrier that I identified, I didn't put the link in the chat. Let me do that. One barrier that I identified is that right now, my company is a mighty team, but we're a small team, and I'm actually the only one who does the direct client work. I have, of course, my assistant, and I have a marketing girl that supports me with some different things. Instagram people, if you go to my link in my bio, I have the link to the Foundations course. Oh no, Facebook is giving me an error, so I'll come back and I'll post this. But if you just go to ashleycuthbertson.com, you should be able to find it. YouTube, I dropped it for you. And then LinkedIn, I think you got it. I hope so. I can't really tell, but I'll put it in easy to find places. But one barrier I identified in my own business is that because right now I'm the only direct client-facing person, of course, my assistant, my marketing girl does not do the delivery of the professional development or the coaching. You're limited to my schedule, my availability, my capacity, and also my energy. And so my goal, like I said, is to make the fundamental shifts in music education that need to happen, right? So that every learner has access to a music teacher who can lead their program in this way. And that means that I need more people to have access. So I'm super, super excited for the course. A really exciting thing about the course is, this work you can't do in isolation. And I would never release this kind of work for people just to like look at on their own, because I'm about action. And this kind of work especially requires conversation. And so one thing I'm excited about is that people who enroll in the course, you also automatically get membership into our responsive music educator professional learning community, where I go We have coaching calls each and every month to support folks as they're working through the course. And the course has different things along the way as well to help you actually put the learning into action, right? A lot of time, I know I've bought digital courses and some of them are still sitting, on my hard drive, in my bookmarks. But the ones that actually I get to the end of are the ones where they're created specifically towards action, not just knowledge, not just a bunch of fun things, but actually things that I can do in my classroom. So if that's something that you're interested in, if you're a music teacher, you can enroll right now in the course. It's only $375. And I say that because when I was running this course as a live course where I would work with teachers for about 6 months, it was not $375. Let's just say that. It was a 4-figure investment that teachers made. And so it's only $375 right now. And if you're interested in that, head over to my website, ashleycuthbertson.com. Link is in my bio, Instagram, folks. And then over on YouTube, LinkedIn, and Facebook. I think I got an error on Facebook, but I'll come back to the post and I'll put it in the comments. So you'll be able to find it. And if you go to my website, you'll be able to find it as well. So super excited about the self-paced course. If what I talked about tonight is something that you're like, yeah, this would be great for my teachers. If you're a principal, if you're a fine arts supervisor at a school district, or if you're a leader at an arts organization, if this is something they're like, yeah, my teachers would really benefit from this. We can also set up a time to talk about me coming live to work with you, or if you want to purchase seats for your teachers in the self-paced course, both options are available. So let me know, jump into my DMs, or if you go to my website, there's a link for you to book a call to learn more about what we do, and then also to schedule a time for me to talk with you about what would be a better option for you, whether our self-paced course, seats for your teachers, or for me to do one of my workshop series packages for you all, which I would love to do that. I'm taking doing lots of conversations this month as I'm enrolling folks for the next school year. So this is a great time to have a conversation about what would it look like for me to support your music and also your arts educators as well. So that includes dance, theater, and visual arts. Although I will say the course is specifically geared towards music educators. If I have enough interest, I might consider creating another version that is for all arts. So we'll see if we decide to do that. But I'm super excited about the course and excited about being able to continue to support my partnerships and maybe to welcome some new partnerships. So get in touch, let me know how I can support. Also, make sure you share this with somebody. If you're a music teacher, share this live session with a music teacher friend. This was literally a professional development for free. So definitely let your music teacher friends know so that they can tap into this. And for the following 3 series that I will sessions I'll do over the next few months, if you're an instructional leader at a school, if you're a principal, a fine arts supervisor, a leader at an organization, make sure you share this with your music teachers. And hey, share it with your instructional leaders too, right? Your instructional leader friends that also are supporting music and arts educators that also could maybe benefit from learning about some of these ideas. Share it with them also, right? Let's make sure everybody who knows that music and the arts are for all of our kids and wants to make sure that our music teachers are best supported and positioned to ensure that all kids get a great music education can tap into this free professional learning. So share, please let your friends know. And don't forget to come join me here, same time, same place, next Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Next Wednesday, we're going to get into the second part of my framework, which is all about creating affirming music learning environments. So I look forward to seeing you again there. And if you caught the replay, thank you so much for watching the replay. Let me know that you watched. Give me a hashtag replay in the comments or send me a DM with what actions you're planning to take. All right. Thank you again, everybody. I will see you next Wednesday.